Located at the southeastern coast of Iceland, Eyjafjallajökull, an ice-covered volcano, began to experience seismic activity nearing the close of 2009. Translation of the mountain's name means Mountains of the Island. This volcano is part of a larger chain that stretches across Iceland, spawned from the mid-Atlantic range tectonic plates. Continuing into March of 2010, that seismic activity persisted and reached its boiling point on March 20th. On this day, an initial eruption breached the surface, only ranking a 1 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI. VEI is defined by the U.S. Geological Survey as a numeric scale that measures the relative explosivity of historic eruptions, volume of products, eruption height, and qualitative observations ranging from gentle to megacolossal. Ash from this eruption could be found 25 miles northwest, leaving cars covered in a layer of dust and ash. For comparison, the Mount St. Helens eruption of 1980 registered a 5 on this scale. As time would tell, the March 20th eruption would only begin Phase 1. Phase 2 would begin on April 14, 2010, when an ash cloud was ejected into the sky that, while still a small eruption, would make the Icelandic eruption memorable for generations of Europeans. Phase 2's eruption began with a VEI explosion which ranked a 4. From this eruption, 250 million cubic meters of tephra and ash were rocketed nearly 6 miles into the sky. Tephra is rock fragments or other particles created from a volcanic explosion. While powerful enough in its own right, a confluence of events would transform this eruption into an event that would bring Western Europe to its knees for several days. First, the ash cloud was injected directly into the jet stream. The stream was moving air directly to the southeast, pointing all the debris toward the United Kingdom and Europe. As we can see in this animation with similar movement, the stream moving from Iceland travels directly toward the continent. Ash ejected rode the stream to pummel residents and air travel within its path. Second, because the location of the volcano was in glacial ice, meltwater continued to pour back into the volcano. Cool water lowered the temperature of the lava inside, and when erupted, created a larger plume of ash and tephra to be launched toward the eastern continent. In addition to the water-cooling lava, it also was vaporizing, which would help fuel the explosion that shot the pollution into the jet stream. The major events and disruption to daily life for our neighbors across the Atlantic would continue from April 14th until April 20th, 2010. While air travel could resume at the end of April, the mountains of the island were not nearly completed with their seismic events. In late May, a live feed showed water still escaping from the crater. Activity would continue to slow throughout the year, showing lower levels of seismic activity in instruments placed by scientists. The eruptions would not officially be declared over until October of 2010. Beyond the seismic events, an additional indicator of the volcano's dormancy was the snow remaining on the glacier instead of melting. March 20th saw the evacuation of several cities near the volcano being ordered. Overall, approximately 500 families were asked to leave the area. At the same time, air travel in the vicinity was also halted as a precaution. During the March eruption, a river within the glacier was recorded to have risen in both height and temperature, which led to closure of roads to the villages. After meeting with local officials, residents convinced regulators to reopen the area for traffic and normal life. Shortly thereafter, both were reopened to traffic, and on March 29th, another closing for ground travel began as a fissure appeared in the ice, causing concerns of flash flooding. Life returned to normal again in southern Iceland April the 1st of 2010, and at the height of the second eruption, farmers in the area were advised to shelter any outdoor livestock, not only due to lava or falling debris from the volcano, but also for newly present fluoride, which can poison the animals. A study from the Center of Public Health solicited participants with whom were near the epicenter of the eruption. Along with the control group, they were asked to take tests and fill out a questionnaire in both 2010 and 2013 as a follow-up. Those that were in the vicinity of the blast recorded regular use of asthma medication, a statistically significant increase in skin rash and eczema, insomnia, high blood pressure, and a greater abundance of medications for depression. All symptoms recorded from residents were collected in 2010. By the time of the second sampling in 2013, the control group and victims were similar, showing little to no harm in the long term to those in the shadow of the eruptions. Similarly to the human residents of Iceland and its surrounding areas, the environment also suffered greater consequences closer to the time of the eruption. The combination of ash and glass created from the subsequent explosions made photosynthesis impossible for nearby plant life. On the opposite side of the coin, iron released from the volcano made for a boon in the photoplankton growth in the North Atlantic. That year's photoplankton bloom was 15 to 20% larger than in previous years due to the abundance of extra iron. Growth could have been even larger had it not been for a shortage of available nitrogen, the secondary requirement to grow. These effects also proved to only be short-term as the next season returned to normal. The secondary explosion in April 2010 was also responsible for a weather rarity known as volcanic lightning, something that's more reserved for Hollywood and destroying the one true ring, as opposed to being a common occurrence in real life. Volcanic eruptions with large ash dispersal can also play a major role in the temperature of the planet. Sulfur dioxide spewed from the mouth of the volcano can stay in the atmosphere and deflect sunlight with an albedo effect, allowing the planet to briefly cool. Unfortunately, the pollutants sent from Iceland were likely rained into the troposphere before they were able to provide any cooling effect. In one respect, the eruption did provide at least one benefit to the fight against climate change. Over the course of April 15th to April 21st, 2010, large swaths of airspace up from the North Atlantic were closed to air travel. It's estimated that nearly 300 airports in over 24 countries were affected by this closure. While the ash was ejected high enough that human interaction was not a concern, aircraft would take a nearly opposite approach. With the right trajectory being reached, the second eruption of ash entering the jet stream caused flight paths to be significantly influenced, making air travel in the area impossible. A spokesman for British Airways, Dr. David Rothery, commented, "Air traffic restrictions have been properly applied. If volcanic ash particles are ingested into a jet engine, they accumulate and clog the engines with molten glass." Lessons had been previously learned in the airline industry when in 1982, British and Singapore Airways flights lost their engines when flying through airborne ash over Indonesia, which had recently experienced a volcanic explosion. The windscreens were thoroughly damaged, and control was only regained when the ash had become solid and broke away. Glass and ash can block much needed ventilation for jet engines, which operate at 2000 degrees Celsius, and components can break down from overheating. Initial wisdom when encountering such a problem suggested that an increase in power would be able to tear through any debris that may be causing trouble. Consequently, this approach only seems to exacerbate the problem. To truly fix the issue, an aircraft should decrease power and lose altitude to drop below the ash causing the problem in the first place. Adding cooler and clean air helps to disrupt and ultimately remove any foreign agents from the jet's engine. As was the case in 1982, forward-facing windows would still be expected to be damaged, potentially to the point where the aircraft may be forced to land using instruments only, as opposed to using visual flight reference to aid in allowing the plane to safely reach its destination. Atmospheric scientists have proposed an early warning system which could be mounted on planes to detect ash or airborne debris as much as 60 or more miles ahead of the aircraft. While testing on the ground has been successful, funding has yet to materialize to test in the air. One positive effect noticed from this travel disruption, however, was the faster adoption of European countries into the Single European Sky program, a bold initiative to create a single resource for air traffic management over the continent. Disruptions to air travel was estimated to have caused nearly $1.7 billion in economic damage in air travel alone. That figure totals nearly $110 million a day in lost fares, as well as grounding 1.2 million passengers. Notable passengers who were unable to fly include then President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle, who were en route to the funeral of the former president of Poland. So many guests to the funeral were grounded that discussions were had to delay the funeral for an additional day while alternative travel accommodations were found. It was later decided to carry on as normal as many countries were unable to send a diplomat to attend the events in person. Sanctioned visits from the Russian President Vladimir Putin were put on hold due to his intended flight path. John Cleese of Monty Python fame was stranded in Norway and ended up spending nearly $3,300 in cab fare to reach his next show in time. Sir David Attenborough and his team were stuck on their way to the North Pole to shoot the new film The Frozen Planet. Extra concern was given to this group as they were in a location where rations were only deliverable by private charter plane. Robert Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow's scheduled visit to an evening chat show were canceled, as well as the London premiere of Iron Man 2, as the pair were unable to make it to the United Kingdom. Even the famous Carnegie Hall was affected, as shows that week were canceled due to a lack of performers to take the stage. Human travelers were weary, but other freight would suffer even worse consequences. Perishable goods like flowers and vegetables were left to rot in the wake of the airspace lockdown. Zambia alone supplies $150,000 a day to Britain in produce, all which was lost during this time. British pharmaceuticals also paid a high price. Prescriptions with short shelf lives were unable to leave their home country in time to make it to their destination. Samsung and LG, both Korean firms, halted production for days as they were unable to get needed components to make their products. Similarly, BMW and Nissan stopped manufacturing in the EU for the same reasons. One Redditor's fondest memory of this event was newscasters attempting and failing, sometimes quite miserably, at trying to pronounce the name of the exploded glacier. As time passed, all gave way to referring to it as the Icelandic volcano. That goes to show the true impact this phenomenon played in the long history of weather and volcanic activity in Europe. No injuries, no fatalities, and on the grand scheme of things, a minor travel annoyance for a week in the spring of 2010. But for those that lived through it, the Icelandic volcano that brought air travel to its knees won't soon be forgotten.